Department of Justice filed a lawsuit against the state of Washington over a new state law requiring priests to break the seal of confession. Supporters say the law protects children, while critics say it violates religious freedom, forcing clergy to break confession confidentiality.
Hello everyone, I'm Joseph Dinesh, a Catholic commentator from Sydney, Australia. Did you know that a deeply disturbing law has just been passed in the state of Washington? One that mandates Catholic priests to break the seal of confession if someone confesses to child abuse. Now, when we hear the words child abuse, our first reaction, quite rightly, is to protect the vulnerable. Even many Catholics might say, well, if this helps save children, why not? But we cannot allow this law to be enforced for two major reasons. First, it violates the First Amendment of the US Constitution, which clearly prohibits the government from interfering with religious practice. Second, it attacks canon law, which holds the seal of confession as inviolable, so sacred that any priest who breaks it is immediately excommunicated. So first, let's take a look at a viral Instagram clip that's steering conversation around this legislation, and then we will hear Bishop Robert Barron's response.
Kind of feel like the Catholic Church needs like a little bit better of a PR department, because in Washington state they just passed a law that now priests are mandated reporters. So if someone confesses to child abuse, neglect, child SA, priests have to report it. But the Archdiocese of Seattle and the Catholic Church is now saying that any priest that does report will be excommunicated from the church, and that is not a good look.
Now let's hear from Bishop Barron as he explains how this legislation violates the First Amendment of the US Constitution, which guarantees the free exercise of religion without interference from the government.
I hope people can see that this proposed bill is a terrible violation of religious liberty. Now go right back to the First Amendment to our Constitution. The very first thing that the Founding Fathers, as they were amending our Constitution, focused on was this issue of religion. And the famous two clauses of it. So the first clause of the First Amendment has to do, if you want, with the possible aggression of religion toward the state. What I mean here is, in precluding the possibility of an officially recognized religion, or a national religion, it holds off, if you want, the aggression of religion. But the second clause of the First Amendment, which has to do with protecting the free exercise of religion, well, that's holding off, if you want, the aggression of the state toward religion. The state's tendency maybe to shut down and to legislate for religion. I think it's clear, I hope it's clear to everybody, that this proposed legislation is an egregious violation of that second clause of the First Amendment that is very much interfering with the free exercise of religion as Catholics see it.
That's a brilliant explanation. Now, because this legislation violates the Constitution at such a fundamental level, it's highly unlikely it will ever see the light of day. The legal web it's woven for itself is so tangled, it will trip and collapse before it ever gets off the ground. Lawsuits will come pouring in, and this will almost certainly reach the Supreme Court, where it will be torn apart and tossed out. Yes, I get that some Catholics see this as a dangerous warning shot against religious freedom in America, but I believe the system still has enough checks and balances to crush this law before it ever takes root. Now, let's hear from Bishop Barron as he explains why a Catholic priest can never break the seal of confession and why doing so results in automatic excommunication. In other words, why does the Church treat the seal of confession as something so sacred, so untouchable, that violating it is considered one of the greatest offenses a priest can commit? Let's listen.
If acting as though it never happened puts you in danger of your life, the attitude is still, it never happened. That's how sacred we consider the so-called seal of confession. Now, why is that? Why is that? Well, we hold that confession is not so much an encounter with the priest. It's an encounter with Christ through the sacramental mediation of the priest. In the confessional, a penitent approaches the Lord and confesses sin to Christ and receives, through the sacramental mediation of the priest, the healing and forgiving grace of Christ. Because that encounter is so sacred, we don't want anything to stand in the way of it. If someone were to feel, if I say something in the confessional, the priest is likely to repeat it, he or she will not approach that font of grace. We don't want anything to stand in the way of one's access to the source of salvation, which is why we take the seal of confession, the privacy of the confessional, with such extraordinary seriousness.
Based on that explanation, it becomes clear that the church's first and ultimate priority is the salvation of souls. And because the sacrament of confession is a sacred channel of God's mercy, the church will not allow anything, even the grievous crimes, to obstruct a soul from approaching the fountain of grace. That's why one of the greatest doctors of the church, St. Thomas Aquinas, boldly affirms, it is more important to offer the sinner a path to reconciliation with God than to expose his sin before others. In conclusion, many people in America argue that it's unfair for Catholic priests to be exempt from reporting serious crimes confessed to them, especially something as grave as child abuse. But let's be honest, Catholic priests aren't the only ones who have this kind of legal protection. Attorneys too are bound by what's called attorney-client privilege, which means a lawyer has no legal obligation to report their client's crime, even if they openly admit to them. So if the state of Washington is truly serious about protecting children from abuse, maybe it should start by abolishing that privilege, which often shield predators from facing justice. I hope this video was helpful. Let me know your thoughts in the comment section. God bless you.